Welcome in to Kick in the Rear podcast. My name is Joe Yarshin. Today on episode 19, we're going to be reviewing How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. So Dale Carnegie was an American writer, lecturer, and developer of courses in self-improvement, salesmanship, corporate training, public speaking, and interpersonal skills. And that's essentially what this book is about. It's how to be a better person and how to just be a better communicator. Not specifically in communication, but just like how to go about different things in life to just be a better human. So without further ado, let's get into it. At the end of each chapter or at the end of each section, Dale Carnegie breaks down a principle in each one and says basically a story or a relatable life experience that has demonstrated the principle. So I'm going to go through all these principles. In the first one, page 20, he says, don't criticize, condemn, or complain. And really criticizing people, condemning, or complaining, very negative, and it sounds like common sense, a lot of the things in this book, but honestly, he uses a lot of world leaders to demonstrate these. So he'll talk about President Abraham Lincoln. He'll use Charles Schwab in banking. He'll use other big entrepreneurs and world leaders, again, that just really demonstrate these principles. So I won't go into the long-winded quotes from Lincoln because honestly, they are very long, but I loved it. He talks about like King George in here too, in chapter 2. So principle number 2, he says, give honest and sincere appreciation. People know when you're blowing smoke. And so the lesson in this one was being really honest and sincere when you're praising somebody. In the third section here, arouse in the other person an eager want. So getting the excitement out of them in something and identifying what it is that they want to influence the behavior in a positive way. And then next on page 67, become genuinely interested in other people. So this kind of ties into the last one. And when you're genuinely interested in what other people have to say, they typically will talk and give you more information that's going to help build the relationship and ultimately help you out. And he discusses his own story that helped him at a party where he was basically just very engaged in the other person, empathetic, but active listening. And Chris Voss in one of my other books, in Never Split the Difference, talks about tactical empathy. And that's kind of what he's discussing there. So in the next one, the principle is simply just a smile. So he shares several examples of why smiling is important, but basically in the other person, it just gives a positive perspective of who you are. And again, to talk about Chris Voss, there's actually something in your brain that like activates when you see somebody smiling. It impacts your mood. So something that hostage negotiator expert says to use, and so does an inspirational American writer. So I think that there's a lot of common themes, and just simply smiling can be effective for developing relationship. And then, or just complete strangers. The next one was, remember that a person's name is that person, the sweetest and most important sound in any language. So the importance of using someone's name in a conversation goes a long way. I know I've heard that expression before, like everyone's favorite word is their name. So I think that's true. You know, when someone uses your name in a friendly way, it definitely, the message is more well received. So again, it says to be a good listener, encourage others to talk about themselves. So this ties into a previous principle before, but again, the active listening and encouraging them to talk about themselves. Everybody likes to talk about themselves. So I thought that was a good one. He says, talk in terms of the other person's interests. So again, this section really ties in all together. Page 116, make the other person feel important and do it sincerely. So He'll give examples of how to do that. But again, if you're making people feel important in their job role, especially, I know in corporate setting, that's important. So just making people more involved as well. So in part 3 here, page 128, the only way to get the best of an argument is to avoid it. So immediately I thought of like marriage or friendships or work disagreements. He says that arguing really doesn't benefit anybody. So active listening again and trying to really see the other person's point of view and just not argue at all is the best way to go about it. So page 139, show respect for the other person's opinions. Never say you're wrong. It sounds again like common sense here, but so many times if you say that someone's wrong, it's just going to aggravate it and perpetuate the problem more. So he says that if you're wrong, admit it quickly and emphatically. So kind of owning up to the situation. And then there's another Lincoln quote here about like catching more flies with honey. But again, that's paraphrased. But the next principle was begin in a friendly way. So when you're having conversation or deliberation, starting off in a friendly way can always move the needle. And then getting the other person saying yes immediately. This is really like a psychology trick that if you've heard of like the Socratic or method or Socrates, this is like something a lot of salespeople use, getting people to say yes. Some of the other books I've reviewed argue that people are kind of aware of this concept, but at the same time, I think that if you get somebody on the train of thought of yes in a sincere way, I think it's really great and impactful and it works. However, if you're getting them to say yes to a bunch of softballs just for you to leverage them at the end, I think everybody knows when they're being swindled or taken advantage of in that capacity. So I think it's still a good principle, but something to be aware of. And then principle 6 on page 171, he says, let the other person do a great deal of the talking. Some of these principles seem a little repetitive, but they are communicated in different ways. So letting the other person do most of the talking, you can learn a lot more by saying less. The next principle on 178, let the other person feel that their idea is his or hers. So I've had this conversation with colleagues before about like in sales or just in general, when you're communicating a product or service, like people are more inclined to adopt an idea that they think is their own. So if you lead them down a train of thought and then they come up with the idea, it's a little bit more concrete. So, it's not a deceptive practice, but it is definitely something that like if people come up with the idea on their own independent thought, it's a little bit more concrete than if you suggest it and then they agree with it. So love that one. Principle 182 on page 182, try honestly to see things from the other person's point of view. I think this is applicable to anybody who has close friendships or relationships. You're not going to always see eye to eye on things with people. So if you can try to see their point of view, you can come quicker to their reality and maybe speak to a solution a lot quicker than if you hadn't. Page 189, be sympathetic with the other person's ideas and desires, not shooting them down right away. Page 196, appeal to the nobler motives. So I think it's tough to explain this one, but like if you lead people down the train of thought of, hey, you are a moral person, I'm assuming that you share common aspects of humanity, it can motivate their behavior in a, again, favorable way for you. But rather than if you're just assuming they're doing something selfishly, can be less effective. Hope I said that correctly, but that's basically what he was getting at there. And then page 200, dramatize your ideas. So when you're discussing a point or a talking point, giving more emphasis and building and painting a picture for that listener or counterpart can help. Next was throw down a challenge. So there's this really great business example about creating like healthy competition. It was a Charles Schwab work example, and there was like a work crew. There was a work crew essentially that like they showed up and they had a tabulation or a total that they had to get, and they wrote 6 on the board. So the evening crew came in, they saw the 6, and they asked them what it was about. And the owner said like, oh, this is what they got done. So the next day the night team, wrote 7 on the board. So they matched the other crew and then beat them by 1. And then the next day, the morning crew had 10, and then it just kept going back and forth in this healthy competition way. So it's from a leadership perspective, throwing down a challenge is helpful. And then in this part 4 section has to do with leadership. And the next principle was about giving people praise and honest appreciation. So especially from a leadership role, if you're providing your team with praise and appreciation, it can go a long way for people. The second principle on 217 was call attention to people's mistakes indirectly. So rather than calling people out, asking like questions in a roundabout way, hey, how did you handle something? Oh, do you think maybe it was this or that? And I thought that was really good. The next principle, talk about your own mistakes before criticizing the other person. So kind of having humility again before you're reprimanding somebody in a leadership role goes a long way, because they know that, you're not just chastising them or saying do something better. You're a human too. And even you're at fault as the leader. So page 225, ask questions instead of giving direct orders. So tying into the last 2 principles, asking in a roundabout way how that something could have been accomplished better rather than telling them how to do it. And then there was a story here about how these 2 guys got in an argument about a quote, and one guy thought it was from the Bible and the other guy thought it was from Shakespeare because he knew it was. And so he asked a third party at the table, like, hey, what was this quote from? Because you're the Shakespearean expert. And so the guy said he sided with the host, that it was from the Bible, even though he knew it was from Shakespeare, because he wanted him to save face. So that's the next principle, is let the other person save face. And I thought this was a good one, because being right isn't always as important as having a good relationship with somebody. Anyone who's married would know that it doesn't always matter if you're right. It matters that the other person was heard, and acknowledging their feelings and acknowledging the issue and coming up with a solution as a team rather than being right is way more important than being right. So love that one. And then page 235, praise the slightest improvement and praise every improvement. Be hearty in your approbation and lavish in your praise. So again, a little repetitive here, but nonetheless important. Page 241, give the other person a fine reputation to live up to. This one had a good story to illustrate this principle of giving the other person a reputation to live up to. They talked about how there's this kid that in elementary school had a reputation of kind of being the bad kid or the troublemaker. And so the teacher on the first day of school the next year was talking to the students individually, and she was kind of hyping them up. So one student, she's like, oh, hey, I like your smile. You're great. The next person, she's like, oh, you have a really good work ethic. And then when she got to this kid that had the bad reputation, she said, hey, such and such, it's really important this year that I hear you're a leader, so it's important that you lead the class and that you do well. And so just giving that person a ethical or a higher platform to be better inherently made them better. So it's not like she did anything except gave that person positive words of affirmation that ultimately they used in a positive way to be a better behaved kid in school. So I like that one a lot. And then page 247, use encouragement, make the fault seem easy to correct. So this example, he talked about like a dance class, and like he had a friend who was getting married later in life and wanted to learn how to ballroom dance or dance, for his wedding. And so essentially this guy got signed up for lessons, and the instructor basically told him he was all wrong in his movements and that he wasn't a good dancer. And so like ultimately he fired the instructor and saw a different instructor, and the next instructor gave him positive words like, "Oh, you're a natural," even though he knew deep down he was a bad dancer. She gave him positive words of encouragement and made it seem like he was going to be able to learn these steps in no time. So he did learn the steps, and he did a good job just by being basically told in a positive, encouraging way rather than that he was not good. So I like that example as well. And then make the other person happy about doing the thing you suggest. So this was kind of an example about children. So he's an example of how sometimes you have to give tasks to children or to employees or to other people, and they might not want to do it. So he gave this funny example of like, okay, he wanted the kid to pick up pears out of the yard so that the lawnmower wouldn't chew them up. And he said, okay, for every basketful you give me, I'll give you $1. For every pear you miss, I'll take away $1. So sure enough, the kid had many baskets full of pears and the mower didn't break. So just an effective way to illustrate that. And that was the last one. So overall, I would say that this book was great. I was introduced to this book by Alex Hormozy's podcast called The Game. And he said, if you only read one book, this is like the one book he read that he really liked. And if you follow the principles in it, you'll become successful. So I thought it was definitely worth a read. And a lot of these things seem like common sense, but then you really think about it. If you apply them and actually do the things in this book, it will improve your relationships with people, which ultimately will help you in business. And I definitely think that's true after reading it. And it says here there's over 22 million copies sold. So that's really impressive. But again, I wouldn't call this a real estate book at all. I would say, if anything, it's a mindset book, business book combination, and loved it. 10 out of 10 would recommend. So I'm going to have hopefully another real estate book next week, if not maybe a business book. But hope you loved today's episode. Please like, subscribe, share with anyone you know that would love to read any of these books I'm reviewing. And again, bippity boppity investment property. Let's go.